Hello, this is a how-to guide for stop motion from a beginner's perspective. Over the last year, I completed my first stop motion video. I spent a few months researching stop motion since my first attempts were, well, really bad. In this video, I'm going to share with you everything I learned and walk you through a few scenes from my stop motion video of All the Stars. I split this video into several chapters so you can skip to any points of interest. As a quick overview, stop motion is a series of pictures played rapidly to produce the illusion of movement. Generally, you take a picture, then make some minor changes like moving an object slightly, and then take another picture. Before you even start taking pictures, you need to have an idea of how your stop motion video is going to flow. So it's best to put together a rough storyboard. Here is my storyboard, which is just notes that details the camera position and description of the scene. A storyboard will keep you on track, but make sure to leave room to be creative and spontaneous. Within your storyboard, try to come up with ideas that will look cool in stop motion. Before you start shooting, I recommend to do some rough scene tests of your more complicated ideas to work out any of the kinks. You can see from this test scene, the billowing smoke doesn't look nearly as good as the final version. I found that I had to reshoot a lot of scenes because I never tested the ideas, and of course it didn't turn out the first time through. Here is my makeshift studio. The great thing about stop motion is you don't need a lot of space. One of the first things you will notice is my camera stand. For this video I decided it would be best to shoot top down so I wouldn't have to deal with gravity. This is a homemade camera stand. Basically, I dismantled the top of a tripod and screwed it to a small piece of wood. I then attached it to a 2x4 and added some legs to add stability. This worked out well because there was nothing to bump, no tripod legs in the way, but I was still able to fully rotate the camera. The weight of the wood added some heft, so it wasn't going to move unintentionally. One tip I highly recommend is to make sure everything is secure. One bump can knock either the camera or your project off slightly, and it can be difficult to align everything back 100%. Even the slightest bump is noticeable in stop motion. Later in this video, I'll show you how to align bump scenes, but as a general rule, make sure everything is secured. I taped all my background pictures onto Bristol board and then taped them onto my table. Some of my pictures needed to move up or down. In those cases, I taped down rulers so my pictures would line up properly and added weight so nothing would move by mistake. Sticky tack is a must to have on hand to keep your figurines in place. The most important rule when shooting stop motion from a studio is to make sure you cut out natural light. It's so hard to maintain the same exposure level when using natural light, and this can add some unwanted flicker or changes in brightness. Here's a test scene using natural light while a cloud goes by. Notice the extreme changes in light. You don't notice it while shooting because the pictures are taking so far apart, but in stop motion the change is drastic. Generally, you'd want to use 3 light sources: a fill light, key light, and a backlight, but this created some weird shadows in the mountains and clouds. So instead I tried getting as much light pointing in all directions to diffuse any shadows. You can use a variety of different light setups, and I will link to a few videos I found useful, but basically I have 5 lamps set up at the front. They're angled so the glare from the picture doesn't reflect into the camera. I used basic 8-watt LED lights. I like the LED bulbs because I found they gave an even amount of light and didn't add flicker to my video. I also have another lamp that I placed a little further away, and this used a 14-watt LED light. Since this bulb is stronger, I put some wax paper over the lamp to help diffuse the light. I also have 2 backlights that I squeeze in beside me. In this setup, I'm positioned very close to my project. This is great because I can make changes very quickly and keep a fast workflow, but you have to make sure you don't block the light or even reflect the light. Stage lighting is so important and is the #1 difference between something that looks amateurish and something that looks professional. Here's another tip. Try to avoid repetitive head motions as this will cause strain. Since you'll be taking thousands of pictures, make sure you move your laptop or computer around once in a while. I often got sore from turning my head in the same direction over and over. Obviously, make sure the placement doesn't interfere with your light source or create light from the screen. I used a Canon EOS Rebel TSI DSLR camera and a Canon 18 to 55mm lens. DSLRs are great because you can control the camera directly from your computer, but you can use any camera for stop motion, including a smartphone. Before you start shooting, make sure all your camera settings are set to manual because you don't want your camera to autofocus or adjust the brightness between every picture. The software I used was Dragon Frame, and I highly recommend it. It's a little expensive, but it's well worth the price for the amount of time you will save. It has so many cool features and it's easy to use. What I really liked about Dragon Frame is you can control your lighting directly from the computer by playing with the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Basically, you want your ISO on the lowest setting, which is usually between 100 and 200. The aperture adjusts the depth of field that is in focus. Shutter speed controls how long the shutter is open to accept light. I will discuss other great Dragon Frame features like markers and onion skinning in the making of scenes. I also tried iStop Motion, and it is a good alternative for the price, but I highly recommend Dragon Frame if you can afford it. Here is the opening scene to Of All the Stars. I printed out a picture taken in Nevada and assembled some props. Before I start taking any pictures, I always use a focus card. As you can see, it's easy to think you are in focus, but look how much more detail you can get by adjusting your lens. You can Google focus test chart images and print your own, but this card came with the Dragon Frame software. So, onto some stop motion. Basically, I took a little chunk of cotton ball and moved it slightly for every picture. I removed a little piece of cotton on each picture to make it look like the smoke disappeared. I used a feature called onion skinning so I could see the past movements of the smoke. This way I can make sure the distance the smoke travels looks natural. Onion skinning overlays your previous shot so you can see the sequence of movements. The trick is to spread out or remove a bit of the cotton ball in each shot, so when it's played back it looks like the smoke slowly disappears. I had 7 scenes where I used an angled camera. It's important to change the camera angles to keep the film interesting. I had to change my lighting so the glare didn't bounce directly into the camera. The pictures are taken upside down, but that should be an easy fix in most stop motion software. Here in Dragon Frame, you just need to rotate the frame 180 degrees. Another tip, when dealing with smoke, instead of spending time sculpting the smoke in each picture, I found it easier just to flip the cotton. This saved so much time and made the smoke look real. I use this flipping technique on all my heavy smoke shots. One great feature in Dragon Frame is fixing bump pictures. Let's say you bumped your camera or your scene. You can use the onion skinning darks as prominent feature. Anything in white has been moved. Once everything is lined up perfectly, you should see only a black screen. This feature is amazing and saved me on several occasions from reshooting scenes from the beginning. Here, you can barely see any movement, but if you look closely enough, you can see the faintest bump. Here is the final version of the space shuttle entering the clouds. This is a scene I had to shoot in reverse. I taped my smoke to a sliver of cardboard and then used double-sided tape to attach it to the picture. I used 3 miniature cutouts of the space shuttle to ease it into the scene. I then used scissors to slowly cut the smoke all the way to the bottom. You can see how tedious this can be, and you have to be careful not to move the smoke too much. Each scissor cut is just a sliver of the smoke trail. Once I completed the scene, I used Dragon Frame's cut and paste in reverse feature to reassemble the pictures correctly. Quite often you will need to shoot a scene in reverse so the animation flows smoothly. This version is just an example, but the final take was shot at 14 frames per second and took 149 pictures. Green or blue screens are really easy to use. I used iMovie for all my green screen effects. Basically for my cloud scene, I used 2 different pictures of clouds. I used one as my background and layered the other picture on top. I then selected the video overlay button and clicked on the blue green screen feature from the drop-down menu. This removed any blue color from my second cloud picture. From there, you really need to play around with the softness slider and add some color correction. I find it's best to see the extremes and then work your way back to something that looks right. You can also add some Ken Burns to add movement. So simple and easy. I also use green screens for several other scenes. By shooting against a green or blue screen, you can then insert a new background. I shot this space scene with just my space shuttle against a green piece of Bristol board. Once you add the green screen feature in iMovie, any blue or green will disappear, leaving only the space shuttle. You may need to use the eraser tool to do some touch-ups and play with the softness and color correction. You can then insert any background you want, or copy and paste it onto several backgrounds. Here, the playback is a little choppy and slow, but it'll be fine when you export. In this scene, I used a green screen as a background, and I'll show you how to use markers. Here's a circle that I sized to fit the whole space shuttle. I then layered in markers using the increment editor. You can play with the amount of increments and test the speed. The markers are there to tell you how much the space shuttle needs to move between each shot. I'd say half of all my scenes use markers as they guide an object's movement. It wouldn't look right if the space shuttle would slow down or speed up within a scene. Here, I started the spin with small increments, then slowly increasing the distance with every shot to increase the speed. I also adjusted the onion skinning so that I could see more frames and add more density. Once finished, you can then add a background to replace the green screen. Here is the final version against a space background. One last tip. Always shoot more pictures at the beginning and end of a scene, even if there are no changes, because you'll probably be adding transitions and effects when editing. And that about wraps it up. If you're interested, you can check out the stop motion video here. I'll be happy to answer any questions in the comment section. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see my next stop motion video. Thanks for watching.